Imagine this. You are asleep and your card is exactly where you expect it to be, in your wallet. Then at 2:17 in the morning, someone tries to make a 4,800 euros online payment, thousands of kilometers away. You haven't lost your card. You have not even shared your PIN. In fact, you have no idea any of this is even happening. But your bank now have to make a very smart decision. Is this really you? Or is it someone trying to steal your money? And your bank may have only milliseconds to decide. Now, banks may have been dealing with these type of frauds for decades. This isn't new for them. What is changing is how AI is becoming part of that fight. It can help spot things that don't quite look right. Maybe you are suddenly spending much more than usual amount. Maybe a payment is coming from devices you have never ever used before. Or perhaps several small details which seems harmless on their own starts to tell you a very different story when you put all of them together. But here is the problem. Fraudsters have AI too, and they are using it to create more convincing scams. They can clone the voices, even they can generate fake contents, and even try to attack on a much larger scale. So now, both sides are getting better. Banks are trying to spot fraud before the money is gone. Even fraudsters are trying to look as much genuine as possible. And whenever one sides get better, the other finds a new way around. Welcome to the payment blueprint. This is AI versus fraud, the invisible war behind every payment. And there is one question we are going to answer. Who is actually winning? So let's stay with 4,800 euro payment for a moment. The customer is at home. The physical card is still sitting safely in their wallet. Now, if you saw a payment like this, your first reaction would probably be someone might have stolen the card details. And you might be right. But here is the catch. The bank can't make that assumptions because the customer might genuinely be buying something which is, very much expensive from overseas website. Maybe they're booking a luxury holiday, or maybe they are buying high-end cameras they have been saving for. From the bank's perspective, both the situation look surprisingly similar. And that's what makes the fraud detection so difficult. A large payment isn't a proof of fraud. Even a transaction in another country is not a proof of fraud. Even paying at unusual time is not a proof of fraud. But when several things start to look unusual at the same time, the bank has to ask very important question. Is there a genuine reason for it? Or is someone actually trying to use the card details? And that's not a very easy call to make. The bank has to decide to approve a fraudulent payment. In that cases, the customer may lose the money. Or if they decline the genuine payment, then they are actually stopping the legitimate customer from completing their purchase. And whatever be the outcome, there isn't much time to decide for the bank. So we have reached at the point where the payment actually arrives at the bank. From your perspective, nothing unusual is happening. You click on pay and now you are waiting. Maybe for a second or maybe even less. But while you are waiting, the bank is extremely busy behind the scene. Do you remember our 4,800 euro payment? The bank simply can't say that it's a lot of money, let's decline it. That would be an easy answer in this case. However, the real question is whether this payment actually looks like something you actually normally do in, on usual days. Has this merchant been seen before? Or is this the same phone or the laptop you usually use? Have there been other payment attempts just before this one? And here is the interesting part. None of those questions on their own tells the bank entire story. A new device is not unusual. Even a large purchase is not unusual. Even trying a payment twice isn't unusual. People do these things every single day. The challenge is figuring out whether all of those little pieces, when you put them together, are actually telling you the bigger story. And all of that has to happen while you are still waiting for the payment to be approved. That's exactly where AI starts becoming valuable. Not because it replaces the bank's decision, but because it can connect thousands of tiny pieces of information far faster than any person could ever do. So let's take that 4,800 euro payment one step further. Imagine the bank has already gathered the few pieces of information. The payment is coming from the devices it hasn't been seen before. And just before this purchase, there were three unsuccessful payment attempts. And now there is much larger transaction coming in. Now, if you look at one of those things, on its own, you probably wouldn't be able to figure out. Even you wouldn't be worried too much. People buy new phones. Even payment fails. Even sometimes people simply type wrong details or they change their mind and try again. None of those automatically means fraud. But here is what makes AI so useful. It doesn't look at those events one by one. It look at how they are related to each other. A new devices, several failed attempts, a high value purchase. Individually, they seems to be very much ordinary. However, when they are put together, they starts to tell you a very different story. And that's something a human analyst could certainly work out as well. However, the difference is that AI can do that across thousands of transactions. It can compare with countless patterns. Even it can reach to the conclusion in fraction of seconds. So AI isn't just searching for one obvious warning signs. It's actually asking much more interesting question. Does this combination of behavior looks like a genuine card holder? Or does it look like someone actually pretending to be them? And just when it feels like the bank might finally be getting ahead, there is another side of the story. Even fraudsters have started using AI as well. So far, we have been talking about AI, which is helping banks, to make the better decisions. But AI isn't only changing how fraud is detected, it is also changing how fraud is committed. Imagine your phone rings. You answer it, it's your son. Or it could be your daughter. Their voice sounds exactly the way it always does. They are frightened. Something might have happened, and they need your help immediately. They are asking you to transfer the money. Now ask yourself something honestly. Would your first reaction really be to question whether it was actually them? Probably not. Most of us would react emotionally long before we start thinking logically. That's exactly what makes the voice cloning so dangerous. The technology doesn't have to fool you forever. It only has to convince you for a long enough to make one decision. A few years ago, many scams were very easy to spot. The emails generally used to look like suspicious. Maybe they are using terrible spelling mistakes, or the message didn't quite sound right. Today, that's no longer something you can rely on. If someone sounds like a person you trust, your brain naturally lowers its guard. And that's completely different challenge. The voice clearing is just one example of how AI is actually changing the fraud landscape. Because now, fraud isn't only about stealing your card details or password. It's about something which is actually convincing you to hand over your money yourself. Voice cloning was only the beginning. Now imagine this instead. You receive a video call from someone who exactly look like your manager. The face is similar, the voice sounds right, and they are exactly talking about the projects you have actually been working on. Nothing feels out of place. And then they say, "We need to make this payment today. Can you take care of it?" And at that point, you're no longer asking yourself, "Is this really my manager?" You're already thinking about how quickly you can get the payment done. And that's exactly what makes these attacks so effective. Several years ago, fraudsters mostly tried to steal passwords or card details, or sometimes they used to steal the PIN. But today, they are increasingly trying to steal something which is much harder to verify, and that's your trust. AI actually allows them to combine different techniques into single attack. Maybe a convincing face, or a familiar voice, or the personal information which they gathered from social media or previous data breaches. On their own, none of these things is perfect. But when they combine it together, they create a story that is amazingly, easy to believe. That's why spotting modern fraud has become so more challenging. You are no longer looking for one obvious clue that something is wrong. Sometimes even everything appears to be very much normal, which means banks are improving the way they detect the fraud, while fraudsters are also improving the way to hide those informations. And that's exactly why this battle keeps on getting harder on both the sides. So this is where the battle really begins. By now, both sides have access to the powerful AI, but they are actually trying to achieve completely different things. Let's go back to the payment we have been following. The fraudsters already have the stolen the card details. But before risking the larger purchase, they might start with something very smaller. Not because they want to buy something inexpensive, but because they are actually testing whether the card is actually active or it still works. If that works, they become a little bit more confident. The next attempt might be a higher amount, or maybe a different merchant, or maybe even different devices. They are constantly adjusting their approach, even trying to find a combination that doesn't attract attention. Now, think about what the bank is doing exactly at the same time. It's not trying to prove that the payment is fraudulent. It's actually trying to answer a much more difficult question. Does this behavior still look like a genuine cardholder? And that's very important difference here. The fraudsters only need to find one way through. However, the bank has to get it right every single time. And that's why this isn't race to build a smartest AI. It's a race to adapt faster than the other side is. And even then, there is one problem neither side can completely avoid. AI doesn't always get it right. So far, we have looked at what happens when the bank catches a fraudulent payment. But what actually happens when it gets the wrong decision? Let's go back to the same 4,800 payment one last time. Imagine it's really you. Maybe you have finally decided to buy the luxury watch you have been looking for a month. Or maybe you're spending that money for traveling. Or maybe you are buying a new phone. And yes, it's much later than you would normally make a purchase. From the bank's perspective, almost everything about this payment looks unusual. But none of it is actually fraudulent. Now imagine the payment is declined. You are still standing and wondering why our own bank won't let you spend your own money. That might be frustrating for you, which is acceptable. But it's not a great outcome for the bank either, because every false alarm affects the customer's trust and the experience. Now imagine the opposite side. The bank becomes less cautious, so genuine customers aren't interrupted as often. That sounds better until a fraudulent payment slips through. And that's the balance every bank is trying to achieve. Not by stopping any unusual payment, but stopping the right ones. Because people's lives don't follow the fixed patterns. You travel, you replace your phone, maybe you shop with a new merchant, or maybe your behavior changes over the time. Even fraudsters change their behavior too, which means AI can't simply learn once and stay the same. It has to keep on learning, it has to keep on adapting itself and improving as the genuine customers and fraudsters continue to evolve. And that's why there isn't perfect fraud detection system ever built. There is only a constant effort to make the next decision a little better than the last. So, after everything we have talked about, we are back to the question we started with. Who is actually winning? Well, I wish there were simple answers. But there isn't, because this has never been the battle that anyone wins permanently. Every time the industry closes one door, fraudsters try to look for another one. And we have seen that it happens several times. Let's take an example of EMV card. Once they became widely adopted, creating a counterfeit card becomes much more difficult in many parts of the world. Did that reduce the counterfeit fraud? Absolutely. But did the fraud disappear? Not even closer. It simply moved somewhere else. More attention shifted towards the online payments, account takeovers, authorization push payment scams, social engineering scams, and so on. The attacks changed because the environment changed, and we are seeing exactly the same pattern with the AI. Banks are using AI to recognize behaviors that doesn't look quite right. Even fraudsters are using AI to make that attack look much more convincing. So if you ask me who is winning today, my answer is neither side for a very long time. One day, the bank blocks our 4,800 euro payment before the money leaves the account. The next day, the fraudsters try a completely different approach. Maybe it's a clone voice. Maybe it's a convincing video call. Or maybe it is something that has not yet appeared yet. That's the reality of fraud. It keeps on changing, and everyone else has to keep on changing with it. They have to keep on adopting themselves. And that brings us to the end of our story. The next time our bank sends you a notification asking, was this payment really made by you? You will probably look at it a little differently. Because behind that single question is the decision that has to be made within very few milliseconds. Not based on the certainty, but based on the probabilities. The, the bank is not trying to prove that you're a fraudster. It is actually trying to work out whether this payment still looks like you. And as we have seen today, that is becoming more challenging every year. AI is helping banks recognize patterns that the people could never actually analyze quickly. At the same time, fraudsters are using the same technology to make the attacks more convincing and even more difficult to detect. Neither side is standing still. They both are learning, they both are even adapting. And that's exactly why this invisible battle continues every single day. So I would like to leave you with one question. If your bank's AI believed that there were high chances of someone stealing your money, would you want it to block the payment automatically? Or would you rather take the risk and decide for yourself? There is no perfect answer. And that's exactly what makes fraud prevention one of the hardest problems in modern banking. I would genuinely love to hear your thought. So let me know in the comments. And if you are enjoying discovering what is happening behind the card, payment, and banking industry, I would really appreciate if you could like this video and subscribe to the Payment Blueprint. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and I will see you in the next episode.